and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, the Political Dragon. I'm happy to be here with you today in something that we're going to call our Deep Dive Recall, going backwards in time, trying to remember and learn from history about what's happening to America and what has happened to America. We hope that you're going to enjoy these segments. We're initially going to be releasing this for our Patreon members, and then afterwards we'll get it out to the general public. Now, for those who may not be familiar, yes, No Soundbites Allowed, we look at long-form political commentary. We look backwards in history to see everything that's influencing what's happening today so we can better make decisions for the future. But what many people may not realize is we've been doing this for well over 17 years. In fact, back in 2007, we started with a blog, which we initially started just to share our thoughts, which then grew into our news reporting and commentary, and that later led to our videos. Now, we did lose our main website in 2022, but thanks to the Wayback Machine, we have the opportunity now to be able to look backwards in time and to see many of the different articles that we wrote, and we're able to compare that to what we see going forward. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a moment, because of that Wayback Machine, we're going to go back to January 9th of 2007. And you may recall, at that time, YouTube was unblocked in Brazil. There were problems with Iran and with North Korea in terms of nuclear weapons and their testing and their plans to make these weapons. And some other issues with Europe in terms of the European Union. It was a time before President Barack Obama under President George W. Bush. And as you can see, we started off in very humble standings. The initial website, our initial focus, wasn't really political commentary by itself, but an overall view of the world. And from those humble beginnings, everything else started. But what we see first off is we started on January 9th of 2007. And at that time, we started with the article ahead of President Bush's, G.W. Bush's, new Iraq plan. So the United States was already in Iraq, looking for weapons of mass destruction. This is in reference to what was going on with Saddam Hussein and the battle against retaliation against the 9/11 attacks against the United States, fighting Al-Qaeda all across the world. It was a very tense time. We had a lot of troops committed. It was a dangerous time, and it had many consequences for America going forward. Not all of them were things that we could predict at that time. But we had a lot to say. We wanted to share our view, and we did. Let's evaluate what we had to say then and see how that has impact on us today. So we started off, and we said, I find things quite interesting lately. Recently, the new Democratic-led Congress has been making a lot of noise ahead of President Bush's new Iraq strategy. Before the president has even announced word one, we see that there are calls to defund the soldiers in Iraq. This, I feel, is an issue. Insane. And I agree. Defunding troops is never a good answer. It's like defunding the police. And we've seen how well that has turned out. It resulted in the exact opposite outcome that we were promised it would have. But much like in 2023, the Democrats of 2007, they didn't care. They had an agenda. Their agenda was to gain political power rather than to win the objective, rather than to resolve the underlying issue. That's the only thing we can take from that when we see that Congress, before they even understand what the plan is, already have come up with a solution that said the plan is bad, it has failed, and we have to do the most extreme opposite reaction. That's what happened in 2007. We've seen what the result is, but let's go forward. First, the president should be allowed to unveil his new plan without the shrieks of doom and prevention that now fill the air. All that this is doing is providing the enemies of the troops with renewed vigor and impetus. This is so wrong to undercut the president and to show a face of America as being confused and cowardly. I don't see how these calls to cut and run can be seen any other way. But let me not get ahead of myself. And looking backwards in time, we can see that's exactly what happened. Because eventually, even though we didn't know it in 2007, by 2011, the United States would leave Iraq. And there would be a civil war. There would be a huge fighting, and the United States would need to return back into Iraq, where we have remained from 2014 until 2023 at this moment. This is a problem because we did exactly what we should not have done. We showed weakness to our enemies. We showed that we had a preference for playing politics when we should be dealing with war. We showed that the American people had an unwillingness to continue to fight, a fight that we started and that we needed to finish. And this cost lives all across the Middle East that's affecting America to this day. Let me go on. It is interesting to see that the Democrats that were elected to change the policy in Iraq are moving on that mandate. I think that if the current cry to run away with our tail between our legs was conveyed to the public in general, there would not have been as many elected. I do not feel that when citizens voted for the change that was never defined, they expected these kinds of results. But this is what happens when people run on and vote for soundbite politics. Ill-defined policies are later realized in a manner that does not reflect the general consensus, and voters can only blame themselves for this. Well, this is directly what we saw in 2021. We have politicians like Joe Biden who had the mandate, they claimed the mandate to get out of Afghanistan, that we were going to end the war in Afghanistan. Now, President Trump started that process, that is true, and then did not move forward because it did not fill all the requirements that he had laid forward to make that retreat, to remove American troops. Joe Biden jumped in, guaranteeing, promising the American people he was going to end the war. He didn't mention how he was going to end that war, which I think is an essential part of the entire process. How are we ending that war? What would be the consequences of ending that war in the worst way possible? Well, we know that answer today. It means war in the Ukraine. It means China threatening Taiwan and Southeast Asia. It means a world that is more militarized. That isn't what voters were told, but that is what was promised. It will end, and no mention of the consequences, no mention of the plan to get that end. And most important of all, voters were never told, oh, this would entail abandoning 5,000 Americans in Afghanistan, a couple of hundred of which are currently being tortured as confirmed by the Department of Justice and the State Department of the United States. We were never told that that was going to happen. But that is what is happening. And we had the same situation facing America in 2007, but we took a somewhat different path. We didn't learn the lesson that 2007 provided to us in 2021. And that's why the world is so chaotic in 2023. But let's see what else I had to say at the time, at the tender age of 38. I, for one, must say that I do not agree with anyone that states that they support the troops but actively debate about removing the funding that directly supports the troops and or additional troops which directly provide manpower support. Unless I misunderstand the word support, to remove or block either item does not provide, maintain, nor keep from weakening or failing the troops in Iraq. So unless Democrats have found a new meaning for the word support, they have lied to the public and engaged in soundbite rhetoric, I feel, which I hate. Now, there is no secret that, the channel's called No Soundbites Allowed. There's no question that I hate when we see politicians and news media try and summarize massive issues that are affecting the world and America in 30-second sound bites in a minute and a half news recaps. You cannot intelligently have these discussions in so little time. You just can't. Too much is left out. And again, in 2021, if you have mentioned that in running away from Afghanistan, in running away from the Taliban, that would create the first terrorist army in the world, that it would mean that we would abandon 5,000 Americans and several hundred of those Americans would be tortured, no one would have agreed to that. No one in America would have said yes. But that's what happened. That's what happens when you have soundbite politics. You have ill-defined plans made up as they go, just trying to get to the next election, to look good, to look strong, to look capable, just to get to that next election and the consequences be damned. We have a problem with that. We have always had a problem with that. Going on, we then went on to say, I do not question that Iraq needs to be addressed in a new manner. There needs to be changes. No one wants to see our soldiers killed. Everyone would prefer to see our sons and daughters, nieces and nephews, and friends home and safe. But that is not how the world is today. Protectionism and isolationism policies have never worked in the past, and they definitely will not work in the future. Wars take time, and there is no timetable that can handily let you know when it's all over. This is not some kind of athletic competition with a rule book and a clock counting down to when we are done. To act as if this is now overtime is to admit defeat before we have finished what we started. The repercussions of that failure to complete is far longer lasting and far more deadly. It's true. We had many people who were, especially Democrats, that were looking at a protectionist or isolationist policy, kind of like Bernie Sanders, that they did not want to be involved in the wars around the world, even if it meant defending America from threats like Al-Qaeda that had already attacked America and killed thousands of our people. They didn't care. Now, whether that's right or wrong is a different question. The question we have to ask is, did this work? Isolationists. We retreated. Did that help the world? No. We know in 2011 that started a civil war, and we wound up going back into Iraq, and then we went into Afghanistan. Isolationism didn't work. But yet in 2023, we are now hearing from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and his plan is isolationism. Marianne Williamson, her plan, isolationism. What are we hearing from Democrats, especially the progressives, in addressing international policy? Isolationism. To retreat. But we can't do that. We can't do that for many reasons, not just economic, not just political, but because the consequences do not work out in our favor. We saw that in Iraq in 2007. We see that today with what we're seeing in Ukraine and what we have seen in Afghanistan and even in the Sudan. Leaving a vacuum of power does not resolve the issue. It just makes it continue for generations to come. I go on to say, I am reminded of something that my senior drill instructor, Sergeant Williams, mentioned when in boot camp. As I recall, he said, quote, "Your moms want you to be treated nice. They're afraid you're going to get hurt. But the fact is that the more you sweat, the less you will bleed. Moms of America will get you killed. But I'm not going to let that happen. So boys, prepare to get wild, crazy, and exotic." End quote. It may have been boot camp, but I think you get the point. And I think it's a very essential point. America has to look at it in the same manner. We have to be prepared, we have to be trained, we have to be willing to make the hard decisions and fight the difficult fights all the way to completion. And if we don't do that, then we wind up bleeding more and for longer. That's what we're seeing with Afghanistan right now. The Taliban are terrorists. They have an army provided by the Biden administration. They are harming women as we speak. The Middle East is still divided, in fact, perhaps more divided than it has ever been before. Afghanistan is a safe haven for Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and they are having operations that are sweeping out of the Middle East throughout Africa and the rest of the world. We have increased tensions with Iran because of this, because we did not train and plan and complete the mission. Instead, we ran away because moms and Americans were upset. They didn't want to fight. They did not have the willingness to stand and finish the mission. They wanted to be home. They wanted their friends and family to be safe. And in effect, they have wound up harming more people globally than if we just stayed and fought. That's the reality of it. I go on to say, and if we don't follow this simple mantra, the troops will not be supported, and they were not. They will come home to cheers from mothers and fathers and friends across the nation. Even louder will be the cheers from the militant factions seeking to control Iraq. Cheers from Al-Qaeda and Iran. Cheers from everyone that will fight to fracture the nation into smaller territories controlled by radicals of various temperaments. Then those cheers will turn into tears. Tears from Americans when the winners that hate our nation come to attack us. Tears from children who have grown up in a war-torn country, fed anti-American rants, firmly believing that every drop of food they didn't get, the electricity they didn't have, the education they couldn't receive, the family that they lost to civil wars, every wrong in their world stemmed from America. That will be all the motivation they need to attack America and its citizens everywhere in the world. Well, that's true. We are seeing that. We're seeing that with the cells of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and even the Taliban. We're seeing that as 140 terrorists have entered the United States in 2023 alone, as confirmed by Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. This is the reality of the world. These children from 2007, from 2014, these kids who have been fighting against America and themselves, their own nation, and Iran and Saudi Arabia, they are coming to attack us. They have attacked us. And they are in our nation. That danger exists today because, in part, of what we did in 2007. Because we did not think it through. We didn't follow through. We were so busy putting politics above warfare in a war zone that we got the worst possible outcome. And again, there are 5,000 Americans who are suffering right now on top of every other disaster. The way women are being treated and abused in Afghanistan. the way they have been poisoned in Afghanistan, the troubles that children are having. Above and beyond all that, there is also the fact that there are 5,000 Americans who have been abandoned under the Biden-Harris administration from 2021 going forward, and they are now being tortured in the hundreds. These are facts. This is the reality. And this is what happens when we are not paying attention. We thought it was over. Joe Biden was looking for the adulation of ending the war on the worst possible terms that he could create. He created an end to the war in a route so embarrassing that it made the 1975 Saigon retreat look like it was well planned. This has hurt America. The lessons were there in front of us in 2007. We should have known better. History was telling us there was a different path forward. But politics told us that the opportunity to win and get reelected, to maintain power, had a different path. And Joe Biden took that path. Not to the benefit of Afghanistan, of the Americans abandoned, nor the consequences of Ukraine being invaded by the Russians, China threatening Taiwan. They are going to invade. They've made that promise because America was weak. Because Joe Biden revealed to the world that he was afraid to fight the fight that was necessary. And he was more concerned about politics than even his own people. And that led to a more chaotic world where we are seeing militarization. Japan is building up a military for the first time since 1945. South Korea is becoming the most militarized, one of the most militarized nations in the world. Southeast Asia is gearing up for war. And there is no end in sight for the war in the Ukraine. This is a 20-year war. We're in the middle of it. It started back in 2013. It is going to continue for many, many more years to come. And this is all because Joe Biden didn't learn the lesson in 2007 that we need to plan and prepare and finish the job at hand and not play politics with the lives of American soldiers and Americans throughout the world. I go on to say, think I'm bleak, a tad bit over the top. We didn't win in Korea, and they are still ready to fight us 50 years later, now with nuclear weapons. We lost in Vietnam for many of the same reasons that we're about to see now, I think, and that cost our troops, divided our nation, and left scars across the world. Most Americans had never heard of a Shiite or a Sunni, yet we learned those words after we lost thousands of lives in one day in our nation. If you think that not getting Iraq stable, leaving while it's still weak and troubled, will not be a problem far worse than what we have seen so far, I think you haven't thought it all through. This is what I think. What do you think? Well, let's take a look. What's the history? What is the result of what we have seen in Iraq after my comments in 2007? We have the ability to have hindsight. Was I correct? Well, we know that as of July 19th of 2021, the most recent data I can find, there were 4,431 Americans that died. There are 31,994 Americans that were wounded in action. Those are huge numbers. Terrifying numbers. Painful numbers. Except that doesn't take into account 5,000 Americans being tortured right now. That doesn't take into account how many people have died in the Ukraine because of the weakness of America in Afghanistan. The fact that we have seen ISIS and Al-Qaeda grow because of our actions in Iraq in 2011 that wound up creating this cycle, the current cycle of Middle East war, and the deaths that are not just happening in the Middle East, but in Africa and now are coming to American soil with 140 terrorists in America at this moment that we are not tracking. This is dangerous. What else? Well, the United States is still in Iraq. We didn't end that war. As we can see from the U.S. Department of Defense on June 5th of 2023, there are over 30,000 troops, U.S. troops, in the Middle East as we speak. And when we're talking about what's going on with Iraq, I want to go to this quote. U.S. Central Command, the U.S. forces present hasn't changed. Despite a public focus on the Indo-Pacific region, the U.S. has maintained troop levels and a presence. Even as we're paying attention to China and Southeast Asia, and it is becoming more volatile and militarizing before our eyes, we're still involved in the Middle East. Quote, our senior leaders talk about China as the pacing challenge and Russia as the acute threat. What our friends and allies in the Middle East don't hear is how the United States racks and stacks the threats and how we're going to prepare for them. And people are nervous. They think it means that the United States and the U.S. government is deprioritizing the Middle East. I want you to think about that for a second. We are seeing most of the Biden-Harris administration focused solely on the proxy war of Ukraine versus Russia. That's where we have spent well over $130 billion focused on that war. We have sent over tanks and we're preparing to send over fighter planes. In the meantime, China has guaranteed that they are going to invade Taiwan at some point in the future. Many believe, like we do, that it will be in 2027 or 2028. But they have guaranteed it's going to happen. Japan, as we mentioned, is building an army for the first time since 1945. We are seeing the entire Southeast Asia. Alaska is building 30 nuclear submarines to deal with China alone. This is a dangerous time. And in the Middle East, what do we see? Joe Biden is trying to put together an Iran nuclear deal, something that failed when Obama did it in 2016. That failed policy, according to then Secretary John Kerry, said that the United States wound up funding global terror. Even on that same day, as the Obama administration, along with Joe Biden as vice president, were celebrating the Iran nuclear deal, the Ayatollah of Iran was out amongst his people chanting death to America. That's progressives, that's libertarians, that's independents, Republicans, death to America and death to Israel. We did not resolve that situation. It did not work out well, and global terror increased because we did not learn the lessons from 2007. We did not resolve this issue in any kind of satisfactory manner. And now we see in 2023, we are going through that same exact process. Iran does not respect America. They did not find that Joe Biden running away from Afghanistan was a sign of strength. It was a sign of weakness. Seeing how few troops we have in Iraq and Iraq still being a hotbed of fighting shows weakness, a lack of resolve to finish this situation, to resolve this ultimately. And Iran is using that weakness to their advantage, not to the advantage of America or global stability. And we see that from the Department of Defense. In fact, you can even go to, this is from PBS. This is March 15th of 2023. Why are U.S. forces remaining in Iraq 20 years after shock and awe? We've had as many as 170,000 troops. At the time that I was writing that article in 2007, we had over 100,000 troops in Iraq fighting at that time. We've gone as many as 170,000. In 2011, the United States retreated. We left under the Biden-Obama administration. Much like we would see Biden do in 2021, we ran away. We left the situation and a civil war broke out. The kids who were in that zone grew up hating America. Why? Because they didn't have their family, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have food, and they were being told America was evil and horrible and the cause of all the wrongs in their life. Not always true. Often not true at all. But that's what they grew up with, and that's why they decided they wanted to attack America. And a civil war broke out. It didn't help. And yet we are doing the same thing again on a bigger scale with an enemy that may have nuclear weapons and is in control of the largest center of terrorism in the world. That's Iran. That's the IRGC. And what has been the end result for Iraq at this point? Well, the average citizen in Iraq, they make $5,300 a year. I'll say that again. The average person in Iraq makes $5,300 a year. And that's considered middle income in the Middle East. That's a good income, which just tells you how stark the difference is between the life in America and the rest of the world. But the United States, we haven't finished paying for this. We have been spending, back in 2007 when I wrote this article, we spent $7.8, almost $7.9 billion. Yes, that's down from 2006 when we were spending about $9.6 billion. And it did go down since that time. But in 2022, we spent $500 million to continue to fight in Iraq because it has never been resolved. And there seems no reason to say that it will get resolved anytime soon, other than Joe Biden doing what he did in Afghanistan, which is to run away, which is the trigger for all the rogue nations, nations that hate America, to step up and become more aggressive, not less. I think in 2007, at 38 years of age, I had a pretty good handle on the politics that were going on at that time. It seems that the Democrats have not learned their lessons since that time and are following the same exact policies, the same soundbite politics to try and stay in power and to get reelected without giving a resolution that actually benefits the American people. It's a problem. But you've heard what I had to write in 2007. You've seen what I got right and what I've gotten wrong since that time. What do you think? Did we get it mostly right? Did we fail, or did we succeed in learning the lessons from 2007? We have hindsight now. This is history. What do you think of it? Well, we hope that you enjoyed this. Please let us know in the comments. This will be released to our Patreon members first in about 2 weeks, maybe a month afterwards. We'll release it to the public in general, but we want to hear what you think. Should we do more of these and try and project how is that going to affect us, or what it tells us about our future? We look forward to hearing your voices, and we thank you for taking the time to be with us today. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, admitted he has not read the Arizona immigration law. I know it is a difficult task to stand up in front of our peers and say to Congress and say that Congress has failed to listen to voters.
You here at CPAC said yes to President Donald Trump in 2016, and I know you're going to say yes to.
She was very aware that she had the flag in her hands and that the flag was dragging on the ground. That is an intentional action. She knows what she is doing. She then drops the flag. Understand the logic, and we see this in social media on a regular basis, and it's something that Newsweek decided not to tell you about. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, a representative in Congress who is writing laws to deny American citizens their rights, has no idea what she's talking about. And they are against the vaccine mandate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you support that?
Last time I checked, there were not a lot of planes crashing into each other at airports, right? You can meet a very, very stringent accuracy rate when it's important, when it matters, like in federal elections.
The quote from Joe Biden where he is admitting that he is willing to lie to the American people.